Thank you so much for joining us. And I think it's going to be a really fun meeting today. We have 3 presentations lined up. We have Masha Medveda, who's a doctoral candidate at the University of Groningen, presenting her research to us on court prediction. Then Ludwig Bull, the CEO of CodeX. And then we have CodeX fellows Michael Schmitz, Rianka Choudhury, and Ruben Youngblooms, who are all some of the driving parts of our CodeX blockchain group, present the RegTracks project to you all. So before we get going, I wanted to see if we have anyone who wants to share any updates with the group. Any news to share? All right, doesn't seem like it. In that case, let me turn it over to our first speaker, Masha. Masha, are you there?
Yes.
There you are, wonderful. Okay, Masha, you have we have an hour for 3 presentations, which leaves you 20 minutes.
Yep.
And please make sure that you have leave enough time for folks to ask you questions.
Yeah, sure. I cannot start the video myself. I just tried, but yeah, no. And I'll show my screen straight
Take it away.
So let me make it. Yeah. So I think it's important to note from the very start that I'm not a lawyer. I am a computational linguist. So now I'm working on my PhD, and I work on legal data, and I specifically focus on predicting court decisions. So today I'm going to be talking about the paper that we published on predicting court decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. So when I say we, I mean our small but very interdisciplinary team at University of Groningen in the Netherlands. So Martijn is a computational linguist, Michel is a lawyer, and Xiao, who is our indispensable research assistant, and I are stuck somewhere in between. So why European Court of Human Rights? To be honest, we chose it mostly for convenience. It has been publishing all of its cases online for quite some time, which is quite unusual for European courts in general. It has most of its cases in English as well. So a very quick look at what it does. It judges based on the European Convention of Human Rights, and most cases are individuals that are suing the states for potential violation of their human rights, and they can do it in 47 states that ratify the convention, and each case is judged by 3, 7, or 17 judges, depending on how complex the case is. So let's move on to why predicting. Why do we do it in the first place? Because predicting court decisions is not a very interesting task in itself. I would personally very strongly argue against using such predictive models in, for instance, high stakes decision making. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at predictors, right, rather than predictions itself. So we wanted to see whether we can use natural language processing tools to see whether we can identify different patterns within case law and see whether we can use them to see what influences certain decisions. So ideally, we would have a case like the beginning of one you see on the screen, and we could say that, for instance, there are these specific judges, and we can identify enough phrases that indicate a certain decision within the text, and that with the certain high enough certainty, we can say that this case is likely to be ruled towards a violation of human rights. So how would we go around doing this? So our paper describes quite a simple system. It's a baseline on which we're trying to build upon. And but it's a good start. So what we're doing is we're scraping the website of the European Court of Human Rights. Then we take the documents and take some parts of them that we need during the pre-processing part. Then we balance the data so that our system can learn all the interesting stuff. Then we train the system, and then we get to prediction. So downloading the data is not a very trivial task, but not a very interesting one. So we'll jump straight to pre-processing. And so this is how a normal case at the European Court of Human Rights looks. We have a few parts. It's the title, then information about the section, and such as who the judges are, the date, and so on. Then procedure, which is mostly the steps that the applicant took in their home country in order to get to the European Court of Human Rights. Then the facts and the circumstances of the alleged offense. And then the other half is the law part, where the court discusses how it came to its decision, then the verdict itself, and then sometimes dissented opinion of the judges who disagree with the majority decision. So for our task, we want to specifically predict the decisions, not just classify the cases. So we want to only be using the parts which could be available to us before the final decision of the court. So these specific sections, and we focus mostly on the facts. So what we do next is we balance our data. So the way the European Court of Human Rights judges is that the majority of cases there end up in violation. And theoretically, we could build a system that just predicts violation and nothing else, and that will have quite a high accuracy. However, for our main task, which is identifying the predictors, that would be completely useless. So what we do, we take a whole bunch of the violation cases out, and we hope that this way we can build a system that treats both verdicts equally. So what we do next is we build the system. We're doing that by taking words and phrases from the facts of the case and try to weigh them and identify which ones are the most representative of each case, and then of each class, violation or no violation, and then try to separate them in the best possible way. And that is our system. So that when we get a new case, for which we want to predict the decision, we can look at it, look at the phrases and words within it, and see on which side of the line it falls. So in our paper, we did 3 experiments. First one was predicting the decisions based on facts. Then we tried to predict future decisions by training our system on the decisions of previous years and then predicting on the years that the system has never seen. And then we tried seeing whether we can use no text and just surnames of the judges to see whether that might be enough to get somewhat of a prediction. So here are our results. We did it for 9 articles of the convention. I'm only showing here 3 with the highest number of cases. And because we had a balanced data set, if we were to randomly guess whether there's going to be a violation or not, it would be about a 50% accuracy. So 77 on average is quite high. And for some articles is 80. So it's clear that this system is not perfect, but it's working. However, if we look at the predicting future decisions, then the scores are quite a lot lower immediately. It's somewhat easy to explain why that happened. First of all, the court interprets the convention differently throughout the years. For instance, what was considered torture 30 years ago or in the 60s or something is very different from what it is today. And similarly, a lot of new terms are introduced throughout the years. For instance, Article 8 is the right to respect for private and family life. And it includes the right for private correspondence. But what correspondence was 5-10 years ago is also very, very different from today. And for instance, if we have a system that has never seen the words like WhatsApp or Telegram or something, and it has to predict the decision of the one that is filled with it, then of course it will not perform very well. We can also see, a bit controversially, that we could just use these surnames of the judges and sometimes predict decisions pretty well as well. But we'll discuss that a little bit later. So once we have our scores, we can also look at what contributed to the decision the most. And again, as I said before, this is a very simple system. So we can see that there's a lot of things that we might consider rubbish, like June 2011 is probably not something we can explain as something that contributes to no violation, at least not in legal terms. But we still see its potential because, for instance, the indicators for violation are force used, asylum seeker, conditions of detention, and so on. We can plot the same thing for the judges, and then that always causes a lot of gasps, but I see the questions. I'll answer them afterwards. So with the judges, it doesn't necessarily mean that if a certain judge is a high predictor for violation, that they are particularly biased. It could be that, for instance, a certain country is notoriously bad for violating a certain right. And this judge is appointed by that country. So he always has to be on those cases, and then he ends up with a lot of cases which have violation. So it doesn't, we have to always remind ourselves that correlation doesn't mean causation, and with machine learning it's even more complicated. So that's what we did for the paper. And since then we were trying to look at our data and see what else can we do. And the problem with the data from the judgment is that there's a lot of facts in there, but they keep appearing through different stages of the process of going through the court. So since the application to the judgment, those facts change, and moreover, the final judgment is made at the very end when the decision is already made. So we try to look through all the other documents that might be available to us. And so we go through application to admissibility, which is just a formal admissibility stage where they throw out cases which don't have enough documents or didn't meet like a timeline requirement or something like that. And then we got to communication stage, which is a point at which the court informs the government that it is being sued for a violation of human rights. And it describes the facts of the case very shortly, and it asks a few questions to the government to corroborate on those claims. And those documents are available many, many years before the final judgment is made. How long that period is depends on the case. The court can decide which order they judge them. But by using these documents, we can properly predict pending cases, truly pending cases. What else we've been trying to do is, other than words and phrases, identifying words and phrases, we try to look at sentences and paragraphs within those texts and try to see how much each one contribute to one decision or the other. And we've done that pretty well. We've built a website. It is not online yet. It's going to be launched on May 26. However, I'm going to show you a quick sneak peek. So the system predicts future decisions for every month. So overall, right now, we're predicting about 76% of the cases correctly. We were very lucky in April because the court is on Corona time when they had 3 cases, which we all luckily guessed correctly. But what we have here is we predict every month and we compare with the decisions of the court, and then we can go into each case and see, okay, here's the decision of the court and we predicted the same one, and we can look at different sentences and different phrases and paragraphs and see how big the contribution was. Or we can go into, I don't know, a case which was predicted incorrectly, and then look at where we made mistakes, try to analyze it somehow, and then we add this information to our model, and then hopefully the next month we don't make the same mistakes. I think I will end there, but the website will launch on May 26th. So if you want to get the link, then the link that was there before was fake. So if you want to go, you can add me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'll add this in the chat right now.
Very cool, Masha. Thank you so much. That's a fascinating project. And a few folks have already asked questions. So first, yes. from Yongxin, actually 2. So first, what features do you use, and then do you parse the sentence and convert into a knowledge representation?
We're not doing any knowledge representation right now. So and we go through different stages, and we're trying very different features right now. So the ones in the paper is just n-grams of different lengths, and we're trying to do different pre-processing. But since then, we try to improve a little bit and see what neural models we can use that we can still explain. But there are quite a few different ones, but I'm happy to maybe reply in the email on that. Cool.
Thank you. Carl's asking on this slide that you showed before, with different predictions you're making. Which one was that? I was wondering what the vertical axis is. Which slide was that again? This one.
So it's the way that we estimate in the weights. So they're different on different on these different slides, but it's just we estimate the basically the TF-IDF scores, if that means anything, and how much they contributed to a certain decision.
I was also wondering what's the predictive model basically.
So for this one in the paper we used an SVM.
Okay.
But since then we tried a few more systems. I
see. Okay. I think, does that answer also Lance's question? I mean, I think that answers Lance's question too. He said, great research. For the SCOTUS ML time evolving random forest classifiers are used to predict US Supreme Court decision. What ML techniques?
Yeah, this is also
SVM is what you're using currently.
So yeah, the difference with our data and the SCOTUS is that we don't have any annotated data. So we, to a certain degree, we have to use usually different algorithms work better when we use natural text rather than annotated variables.
Okay, so then maybe one question from Ludwig, and then Thomas has his hands up. But let me read you a question from Ludwig. Ludwig saying, really cool, since you have been able to correlate tokens directly with outcome, are you using something like an SVM? Okay, you answered that already. Seems similar to Nico's Allegras paper from a few years ago. Are you familiar with that one? Also, how confident are you that your model is able to pick up on extremely complex factual scenarios given a relatively small sample size, the difficulty of data masking, and the relatively small correlation between individual tokens and outcomes?
So we discussed quite at length how we built on the letters paper, we found a lot of issues with that one, with the data that they used and how they processed it. So you could find it in the paper. I'm also happy to discuss it over email or something. We use a lot more data than they do. And what we started doing now is by adding all this data from the communicated cases, and we're also trying to use admissibility cases and so on, we really increase the amount that we use. But of course, this is basically the goal of a long project, to try to understand more complex facts. And we're definitely not there yet, but nobody else is. But this is what we're aiming at.
All right, cool. So yeah, if you want to continue that thread, maybe you could continue, speak with Ludwig directly. Thomas, you have your hand up. You want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, I just wasn't quite sure how to word it. I was just wondering if you guys had ever tried, just for fun, tried training or testing the model with articles that it wasn't trained for. Like, for example, if a new law or article was added, how do you think you'd still be able to make a decent prediction, given there's no history of cases?
So with the European Court of Human Rights, that doesn't happen. The convention is pretty much set. So, but that definitely happens with other cases. We're working with the Dutch lower courts, for instance, and then of course the accuracy drops. But then, for instance, with the European Court of Human Rights, we're not actually working with laws per se, but just with the facts of the case, and they often don't mention any laws, and then we kind of hope that it still can sort of generalize well enough to be able to predict those. But yeah, that's a good question to research, really.
Okay, last question from Scott. It says, thank you, Masha. If you had access to Google's AI and Google neural machine translation, in what ways could you develop a successful approach to the changing meaning of words over time? Could you easily bring your system together with a Google neural machine translation or Google AI, for example?
We haven't tried. So I wouldn't dare really answer this question then. But I would like to look into it, actually. That sounds really nice, but we haven't tried anything like that.
All right, cool. So folks, if you have any more questions, please send an email to Masha directly, and you see in the chat she put her contact information there already. Masha, it's such a cool project, and we really appreciate you joining us and
thank you so much for having me.
More about it. It's really fascinating work you're doing. So quick round of applause for you. Thank you for joining us, please keep us posted. I will now turn it over. All right, thank you. And I will now turn it over to Ludwig, who is joining us from London, I believe. Ludwig, are you there?
Hello, yes, I'm here. I'm here in London. I'm here in London in my living room.
Fantastic. So,
everyone.
Ludwig's the CEO of CodeX, and we're excited to learn about what you're up to with your startup.
Yeah, great. Cool. So I'm really happy to present. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to just unmute your mic and ask me directly, or write it in the chat. If you're shy, that's fine. So I just need to make sure I can share my screen. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay, are we now on the CodeX website? Is that what you're seeing? Or are you seeing my desktop?
Now we see the website.
Great, excellent. Okay, so my name is Ludwig. I'm the CEO of CodeX. We do something really easy. We just tell you what's in the terms of all the contracts that you accept. It's a common problem. We all know it. We all have it. We've all signed maybe even hundreds of contracts over the course of our lives. Every time we enter a restaurant, although not much of that is happening at the moment, we agree to their terms and conditions. Whenever we buy a phone, energy contract, you name it, we're constantly going around signing contracts, and we don't really know what's in them. Most of the time, there's just some stuff in there we don't really care about, but there are some very important things in the contracts that we sign, and we have no idea about those terms. So what we do at CodeCorrect is we just read through the contracts, we find the most important things, and we show it to you so that you can then look at it and get information. So I'm just going to quickly log into the account and just show you what that looks like. This is our website. There we go. Right, so this is just, my account here, and there's not that much going on. This is just a typical consumer account. I'm just a person, and I want to know what's in some of these agreements. So as you can see here, if I click on the plus icon, we've got all these different massive standard contracts, right? So for example, this one, TfL, conditions of carriage. So TfL is Transport for London. These are basically the terms and conditions of using the tube, the metro, the underground in London. We can just go ahead and add that to our account. And yeah, so if we go into this now, oops, this is the Amazon one, TfL. So if we're on TfL conditions of carriage, we do a couple of different things for each of these agreements. So one thing we do is we just allow you to download the actual contract, which if I click here, it's just going to download the full contract. We also give you a bit of information about how this contract compares in comparison to others. So this one is a bit longer. It has a bit more words and a bit more paragraphs than the average contract in this area. We think that length is actually quite an objective way of rating how difficult or easy a contract is, because it's sort of it's a metric that we can quickly and objectively calculate without having to go into any value judgments about what an easy or a hard contract is. And generally speaking, simplicity and shortness and brevity are good qualities of good contracts. But most importantly, if we go into here, we have these two tabs. We've got rules and signatures. So for the rules, this is really where we find sort of the most important things about what's in this agreement. And some things are, most things that we're interested in are about money, are about data, and are about cancellation policies and other things that we think are interesting. So there's a couple of different ones here. One of them is, for example, that if you tap in and out, so in London, you have to actually tap into the metro. So with like a contactless credit card, or your phone, if you have Apple Pay or something like that. One thing, for example, is that, hey, if you tap in and out if you don't tap in and out with the same card and device, you actually get charged for 2 incomplete journeys, which I sometimes did. But also a really interesting one is this one. Okay, this is just about CCTV, but one that I thought was quite cool was this one, retention of personal travel data. So this is in the terms and conditions of the Transport for London system, and it just says, this is really interesting. TfL retains the details of your journeys paid with Oyster card. So that's like a metro card that you can buy for 8 weeks. And afterwards, they will anonymize the data, but still keep it. And for contactless payments, they actually keep those details for 13 months. So yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting to know that Transport for London has a permanent record, or a record of every single journey I've ever taken for the past 13 months. So yeah, I mean, we've got plenty of these here, and you can go around and you can explore them. We've also got Amazon. Another one that I thought was quite interesting is that we recently added was Sky. So Sky is like a telecommunications company here in the UK, and yeah, there's plenty of things in here that you might want to check out. A lot of things are also about cancellation policies, because this really gives people opportunities to get out of the contract if they're increasing the price, for example. But also they actually go around, so Sky, this company, actually goes around buying data about you from other companies. So Sky gets data about you from credit referencing agencies, which makes sense, most companies do. But they also buy data from loads of other companies, and the contract literally says, and here we quote it, we acquire data from several organizations, including dunnhumby, CACI, 20CI, MasterCard, Emma's Diary, and Game, that we use to enhance the household profiles we use within AdSmart. And Emma's Diary is actually a baby and pregnancy advice site. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, so you get the idea, right? This is what we provide. We also have, for businesses, we give them the opportunity to actually, connect to our API, so that they can then have their customers sign these agreements directly online. So imagine you're logging into a new website, or you're buying a subscription somewhere, you're buying something online. With our API, you can immediately then get that contract added to the other user's CodeCorrect account. You can email them the document. You can get a valid e-signature. So it has all of the contract management things as well for businesses. And also we're working on dispute resolution to, so that you can solve a dispute directly from within the underlying contract in the same platform. But really, what we want to do is we want to change the status quo where everyone is going around signing contracts that that we don't know what's in them. We want businesses to be transparent about what is in the agreements. We want to make it easy for them to tell consumers about it, and we want consumers to actually insist that they know and that they are made aware of the important clauses and that they have access to information. Because the current situation we've ended up in, if you go to some, even some of these companies that we've added to our account, it's crazy. I mean, there are so, it's even difficult for us sometimes to figure out which rules are actually apply to the users of a particular service or to the customers of a particular product. And we're getting to the level now where it's basically, the whole relationship is basically fictitious. It's not entirely clear how it's acceptable that we're living in a world where we all are subject to rules that we don't know about at all. So that's what we're trying to change. We're based here in London. We're currently onboarding hundreds of users every day, so getting quite a lot of traction. And yeah, so I think that's all I really wanted to say. I'd be very happy to have some questions, and I haven't checked the chat yet, so I'm just going to.
Yeah, great. So I think this is really awesome. I love this notion of first of all, empowering consumers with the information of all the agreements that surround them, right? Like we're walking around in a cloud of agreements where we don't really understand what's in them. And so my question would be, it's already extremely valuable, I think, just making people aware of them and giving them the relevant information in an accessible format. But can you see going even further then, once you have certain information and your users' preferences, you might even be able to operationalize or automate certain actions. You could say like, okay, if this happens in one of my contracts, I want to automatically send the product back or whatever it is. Are you thinking along these lines too? Or?
Yeah, totally. I think that's totally where things should go. And we have one thing like that already in planning, which is online dispute resolution. So it's by saying, okay, if a customer has a problem with whatever, for whatever reason, with the company, then they can go into the contract and directly start the dispute with the company from within the contract. So in your example, Roland, if they had, maybe the product that was shipped to them was not good, then they would go into the part of the contract that says, the product has to be fit for purpose, and they click start dispute. They can immediately submit the information there. So this is interesting enough. This is a little bit what we started with when we got this going, which was only a few months ago. But then we sort of realized that the online dispute resolution is quite a sophisticated thing that stands at the end of a process, which has to start with just giving information to people. So right now we're doing something a bit simpler than that, but I think that is quite useful.
Yeah,
that's a good question. Or do you
okay. So Aaron is asking, where's this is really interesting come from? You go ahead. You can go through the questions since you see them too. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Aaron, yeah, that's right. So we annotate that. So right now we are reading those contracts. We have qualified solicitors and people who can read documents and extract information from them, annotate them, find the most important thing. I think that obviously we're building a great data set, and that might be interesting in the future for using AI, at least to maybe identify some particular clauses or to make it easier. But I do think that summarizing complicated documents is something that human brains are pretty good for. So we're annotating that. All right, next question. How does knowing about terms and conditions allow the customer to remedies en masse as a class action? Connect similarly or harmed users? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I haven't really thought about that much, but so clearly what's happening now, which is really interesting on our platform, is that we have a lot of people who are starting to realize that they're all in the same boat and they all have the same agreement, and they didn't necessarily know about what was in it before. So we want to give them ways to connect and to give them ways to indicate to each other how they feel about things. So we've got a few features coming up that might involve blending a little bit social media reactions and clauses of contracts. And then you could imagine maybe connecting similarly harmed users and saying, okay, all of you have actually signed this particular agreement, and therefore you're all in the same class. I think that's interesting, but it is something far in the future. Right now, we're just keeping it simple. We're just giving people access to information. But I think that's a really interesting point. What's the underlying contract analysis technology? The brain. So yeah, I think, as I said, it'd be interesting to work with AI here, but currently humans. For businesses already using CodeCorrect, what are their primary use cases? Do they use it to explain their contract to their customers? How do they explain the process to their customers? So what are the use cases? So first of all, most important thing is that you get to be transparent to the customer. You get to tell the customer in these rules, right? So rather than just throwing the entire agreement at them, you can actually use our little format, which has these nice little rules that you can work out. So that's the first and most important thing. You can differentiate your company from others by being transparent about what's in your agreements. And you can, our motto is, be a great company, tell your customers what's in your terms. Don't just throw the contract at them. That's the first thing. Second thing is e-signatures and contract management, which is just a nice sort of add-on that, okay, you just have one dashboard where all of the contracts are and all the signatures are, and it's all legally binding. And then the third thing is online dispute resolution, which we haven't rolled out yet, but we could roll it out pretty soon if we wanted to. We just want to, focus on the basics first. Okay, next one, the application is certainly important. I'm assuming I hope that means that our application is important, but if you can specify that, ranting further below in the chat, I'm not sure I understand the particular question. Sorry, okay, next one, I'm just trying to get through in time. Do you have contract templates? Do you have fairness measures for contracts? I assume you do need to parse and convert into knowledge representations, am I right? We're not really parsing much about any of the documents right now. The only thing we're doing is we're getting these scores of how many words are in here, which is pretty straightforward thing to do. We have templates, so businesses can actually use templates where they can use an NDA agreement or another type of agreement. So when a business is uploading their agreement, and they can send it to users, or they can have it indexed in our database, in which case users can add it themselves. So we have templates for them. We want to add more, but yeah, we do. In terms of using knowledge graphs or knowledge representations, definitely something useful to do in the future for automating more of this, but right now, no. So I'm really trying just to go quickly enough. I do want to give everyone their due. Okay, I have a few questions for you to pick and choose. How do you scrape the agreements? We don't scrape them. We actually go to them, get them ourselves. Traffic volume. Yes, I mean, right now, kind of early days, we're doing all of this manually, which I think is good because it ensures high quality. Down the line, we may actually end up automating some of this. We'll see. Do you plan to pursue the aggregation of claims based? Yeah, I think we've spoken about that. Class actions, interesting. I've done quite a lot of work in litigation finance before doing this, so I'm kind of aware of some interesting opportunities there. But right now, kind of keeping it simple. I'm curious if anyone has used interpretations provided in court to reinforce message. No, we haven't gone there yet. This is kind of a reason we just started the company very recently, so that has not happened yet. But that would be interesting. It could be an interesting source, right? We are sort of going around and doing that. Can the customer also require information or request some of the rights related to data protection? Oh, yeah. So that's interesting. So GDPR, and also the GDPR, probably everyone knows this, right? But it's just a data protection regulation that applies in the European Union, as well as other statutory rights, are obviously apply to all contracts. So there's a certain set of rights that every single user will always have in certain agreements. So those are sort of some where we might say, okay, this is this would be an easy way, as Roland mentioned, to start the issue or the dispute out of the agreement itself, because we know that if this contract is in the EU, then the GDPR applies. Right now, we're usually linking the users directly to the data protection officer of the individual company, or there's there's different places, different things users can do to regulate how their data is used, and that companies already account for, and we're just directing them to those resources. But it would be interesting to have, something like that within our own platform. To what extent does ML play a role in isolating, reconciling language? Much of the time, contracts say the same thing. Wonders whether a highlight function might be useful to isolate edge cases, or perhaps quantify trends. Yeah, that's totally interesting. This is also what we're playing around with right now to do exactly that, to sort of highlight things in contracts, especially because the clauses that we're interested in are always very, very similar. It's always about data, it's about money, or it's about something very odd. The odd ones obviously hard to catch, but at least for data and money, I do think there's a good chance that within a decent amount of time we'll be able to build some model that at the very least identifies the right clause, and maybe even, I mean, I don't want to go too far. We'll definitely be able to identify those clauses in any agreement at some point in the future. So we're really a tech company, so we're really thinking about data and like building good databases and having very good annotated databases from the start. So I do think we'll be able to get quite far in that. Okay, finally, what do you expect the revenue model to be? By my just the likes of Bentham, Burford, or yeah, that's pretty funny. So revenue model is basically businesses paying a relatively modest subscription fee to have the contract management, to upload the contracts, and to have the dispute resolution. So we charge businesses to do this. We don't charge consumers. They get it for free. Yeah, so with Bentham and Burford, like all the big litigation funders, I don't know. Like, first of all, this small consumer claims is not something that they're interested in at all, as far as I can tell. They're going for like the big, super huge, $100 million claims. But I do think there is a world where sort of portfolio litigation finance could be interestingly combined with this, even though it's not entirely clear that we'll ever get to the level where we can actually create a risk profile or even aggregate these claims, because there will be a lot of small ones. And that is definitely not the primary focus of the platform, because the primary focus of the platform is just to give people information they don't have. So please do reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. Love to be in touch.
Hey, great to have you. And yeah, if you could put your contact info into the chat so people can reach out, that'd be fantastic. Ludwig, awesome project, really nice, and amazing, for how far you've come already in a short time. So yeah, good luck with your next step. Please keep us posted. And quick round of applause, virtual applause. And then last but not least, we'll turn it over to our CodeX fellows, who will introduce you all to the RegTracks project. All right, Ludwig, great to have you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. Over to Michael,
Priyanka, and Ruben.
Yes. And Ruben. Okay. There you are. Okay.
Coming off of two really super interesting projects. That was great. Yeah, so Roland, thanks. Great to see you virtually again. Soon enough, we'll be able to see you in person. Am I frozen or are you frozen, Ruben? Sorry. Anyway, we're really excited because one of the things we're looking at is how to deal, broadly speaking, within the blockchain group at Stanford CodeX, the problem and contradiction of regulation. For a lot of industries, people don't consider that it is a major issue to the development and of both the technology and broadly speaking, the deployment of it. We have looked at how we can help address this, and we have what we hope is a step forward with the RegTracks project. So if I can share screen right now. We are on. So like I said, this is a project of a number of folks who do a lot of other things coming together through the Stanford CodeX blockchain group. We are, there we are. So essentially, what I'm going to do is hand it over to Ruben right now, because we're actually, I want to make sure we get through the slides, but not really we have enough time for discussion. And my apologies already for stepping on the presentation. Ruben?
All right, so I think, I think a lot of people here, especially on this call, understand blockchain on a very deep level. So I hope that you will forgive me if I just take a quick minute and run through some of the affordances that blockchain has, and really the things that make blockchain so special are the things that also make it a little bit difficult to regulate. So these are the issues that we're wrestling with. So I get a lot of questions just in my life and my work about what could possibly be so hard about regulating what people think of as digital money, right? And I think that comes from a place of believing that Bitcoin and blockchain are coterminous, and that blockchain is really just computer money. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So some of the issues that we run into when we're thinking about regulation are definitional issues. There are double-digit numbers of blockchain working groups in the United States at the moment, and all of them have a different definition of how they are, of what they're regulating. And so that means that they're regulating different subsets of blockchain and blockchain technology. And this is because it's not easy to come up with a comprehensive definition. If you under-regulate, you're carving out space for a lot of blockchain to be unregulated. And if you overreach in your regulation, you end up in a situation where you're putting, Google Sheets or something under FinCEN control, and that's really not what we want. There are jurisdictional issues. Blockchain, by and large, is permissionless code, and it doesn't really have a home jurisdiction. And it's not clear who has any sort of regulatory authority, or whether everybody has regulatory authority or nobody. There's also the impact of blockchain. We have blockchain, the technology, and some of the implementations, such as cryptocurrency. And just looking at the cryptocurrency market, I checked it about half an hour ago. It was at 266 billion. It could be a quarter of that by now, or it could be 3 times that by now. It's been, it's been 20 minutes, so who knows? But there's no denying that the technology has a lot of tangible, real-world impact that we have to be sensitive to as we're thinking about regulation. And lastly is the culture. Bitcoin, which really kickstarted the blockchain movement, it has its roots in the cypherpunk movement. So you have a whole group of people that are really foundational to the creation of this technology and to putting it out into the mainstream. And when you're trying to regulate something that people are very passionate about, you're fighting an uphill battle already. So these together have caused a very fragmented regulatory landscape. And this is one of the things that we're working on. We're trying to figure out how can we shed light on what's happening around the globe, because everything that's happening around the world impacts how blockchain is going to be implemented and how it's integrated into our lives in the future. So the key question that RegTrax is aiming to answer is, how should we regulate? And there are a lot of nuances here. Do we regulate blockchain, or do we regulate cryptocurrency? How do we feel about this idea that code is law? And code is law basically says, we have a kind of abstract human law that we follow, but there's some question about whether we should allow for a little pocket of the world where, when you have open source code, where you have code that nobody is being forced to participate with, perhaps the metes and bounds of that code should dictate what's legal, whether that's scamming, hacking, engaging in frauds. People have the ability and the intelligence to go in and say, I want to engage with this. I maybe don't want to engage with this. So what we're asking is, how should we regulate? And if we should regulate, what does that look like? So before we get into a little bit more of the motivation and actually what RegTrax is and how we're putting it together, I thought it'd be really fun to just take a quick moment and open it up for discussion, because my experience has been that, especially when it comes to blockchain regulation, everybody has an intuition about how they think it should be regulated. People have very strong opinions, and their intuition is so close to them that a lot of times they are surprised by the fact that somebody else could have a different intuition. And I'm really interested to get just a small sampling of how people are thinking about this, whether you're familiar with blockchain or have just kind of heard about some of the things I've talked about over the last couple of minutes. How should we regulate? And so, I'll kick it off a little bit and say I'm very in favor of code is law. And I wonder if, or following the code is law philosophy, and I wonder if that strikes anybody as odd. So if anybody has any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. And I told myself I would give it about 4 seconds of awkward silence before I call on Mike. So anybody that speaks up is really just rescuing him from getting called on. So
okay, I'll just rescue, but I'll be quick. So
I'm sure Mike appreciates it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just noted that in Switzerland, where I spent a bit of time, also speaking to a lot of people in the compliance world, when they're sort of thinking about blockchain, they're still sort of trying to get their heads around how actually it really works on a technical level. So I think the question, I just wanted to make an easy opener by saying the question of regulation for a lot of people doesn't arise because they're just not fully aware of actually what it is.
Right, and that goes for everybody, right? It's people that I've been doing blockchain development for 3 or 4 years now, and there are things that come up every day that I'm just so confused about how they work and what they do. And a lot of times the regulators that are putting these laws in place have a couple minutes, maybe an hour to really, get a briefing from an aide about what this technology is that they're regulating. And that's maybe not a good way to go about it. So Mike, I see you nodding. Do you have any?
No, it's there's so many opinions, and I think it depends upon where you sit, what hat you're wearing, what you think about regulation in the blockchain space in particular, and whether you think that's regulating Bitcoin against illicit uses, or whether that's like the oppressive hand of regulators stopping innovation. I mean, it really, I've been struck by how far apart the multi-poles are on this. And having come from a policy regulatory background as well, I think one of the things that we all have engaged with is how do we actually have an intelligent conversation and then lead towards something meaningful, knowing that actually a discussion, whether it's a meeting of minds or not, an actual discussion about the substance, to your point, what the details are of the technology and what would even be subject to regulation. So these are the kind of conversations we invite you to come join with us at the blockchain group. We're meeting after this. But let me turn. I know Rianka, are you there?
Yeah.
Because let's talk about where it is now.
Data. So blockchain adoption is a part of probably the next industrial revolution, and according to World Economic Forum's report, 10% of global GDP will be registered on blockchain-based systems by 2027, as compared to mere 0.025% in 2015. This does sound impressive and very interesting, but is it really so? This is a survey done by Deloitte in 2019, where industries were asked that which of these are the biggest barriers to blockchain adoption in the industries. Clearly, the answer is blockchain regulations. A lack of general regulation is a problem. In the survey, 30% of these respondents had a concern over the lack of clear blockchain regulation. In 2018, this was 74%, so the percentage has definitely reduced. So the good news is that globally, some governments have already come into terms with the idea of blockchain implementation. Others are still considering it. Yet there is a really long way to go. The other issues being companies not understanding the reasoning behind implementing a new technology and not trusting blockchain because of potential security threats that surrounds it, like, for example, double spending, crypto attack, and there are many others. This data definitely proves that lack of general blockchain regulation is a problem. So the question arises that why are we discussing this? Because data gives us evidence that most governments have been really slow in regulating blockchain. To understand how the world uses blockchain and regulates it, we need to look at data. This approach of being super cautious about blockchain by the legislators and regulators worldwide has contributed to a broad sense of uncertainty amongst companies, investors, attorneys in the blockchain space. In the absence of integrated regulatory framework on the horizon, it's really hard to believe that the state of uncertainty will change anytime soon. So here we are trying to talk about our project, which is really trying to solve this problem. Moving on to the next slide, where the organizations were asked about their concern towards blockchain related regulatory issues. Half of the respondents cited privacy related regulations as a matter of concern, markedly more than any other choice. So vague data regulation is one more issue. For instance, GDPR does not align well with blockchain's immutable ledger. This is the reason we launched RegTrax initiative with the goal of collecting, tracking, disseminating regulatory developments from around the world. Getting to the regulative design, right, it's vital for blockchain technology to really live up to its potential. When we talk about US, it's rightfully considered the most advanced country in the world in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrency adoption. This also defines why blockchain and cryptocurrency regulations are so deeply connected here. However, due to federal system adoption in US, while digital currency are recognized and legalized throughout the country, laws are not yet homogeneous and standard across all states, and that's a problem. Interestingly, while the US government has spoken on the extensive regulations of cryptocurrency industry, it's been fairly quiet on other blockchain related business models. There are no clear regulations that are currently present in the department. But however, like FTC went further and created a blockchain working group, which primarily is trying to track down the illegal and fraudulent schemes arising in the marketplace from time to time. We can also see that Vermont has enacted supportive laws that recognize blockchain records as valid. But to really understand what's happening globally and what's happening in other blockchain spaces, it's been around 11 years that the blockchain has been introduced, and we are seeing more and more governmental and institutional involvements. Governing entities within a country have a power to either suppress emerging technologies, or they may foster or embrace it or use it. Therefore, individual countries hold an incredible central role in defining the future of distributed ledger technologies on a really grand scale. Thus, the introduction of legal frameworks by sovereign nations will ultimately play a decisive role in determining whether mass adoption of blockchain technology will be coming soon, phenomenon in our daily lives or not. There are an increasing number of countries that are actually taking substantial steps towards regulated adoption of blockchain technologies, like Hong Kong, US, Japan, and making a leap forward to embracing the crypto world. You can quickly see a snapshot of the regulatory frameworks of several major countries worldwide regarding what the concerns of their respective legislative agendas have towards a blockchain. More the blockchain will be developed, the more countries worldwide will be accepting a proper regulatory framework for it. It would be curious to see how many governments will join the path to regulating blockchain in the coming times. So we envision the RegTrax legislative and regulatory repository acting as a focal point for general public and policymakers to gain better understanding of this regulatory framework. We'll be building our notes for key jurisdictions for easy access of relevant laws and legislations. And yeah, Mike will talk more about it.
Yeah, and what thank you, Riyanka. What I'm thinking is really quickly, just to give you a sense, because we're running low on time, but short on time too. But just to give you a sense of what we're thinking about as we phase in, having a repository for jurisdictions and specific legislation and regulation, both enacted and proposed, and have a community with leading expert scholars and contributors who are helping research and bring that information to the curators for review, and posting this in this open, reviewed and sourced and vetted repository, and then looking for it to become something down the road that we have more engagement. But that's just to let you know, we already have, 6 of the, leading both thought leaders and experts globally in the space that already have agreed to be curators. We're looking to get many more, and we're also already getting students and others to volunteer to be contributors. So this is kind of, we're open source or crowdsourcing the way that we're going to build this thing. So I don't want to go, except there's a lot to come. Let's go, if we can, quickly to some questions. And I don't know, Ruben or Rianka, you see the questions. Bruce, coming off a 4-day space industry-based conference, I wonder if how choosing clearly unsatisfactory regulated domains like space or developing country project finance or ocean exploration and mining would allow reg drafters to propose solutions in the whiteboard space. I think absolutely this is the kind of engagement that we're hoping to get from including people specifically like you, Bruce, but in general, you know, where people come together and there's looking at whether you call them use cases or big hairy problems that come in and try to do that. Roland, I'm trying not to step on the end of the hour, but what other?
No, you can.
A bunch of questions.
It's okay to go over for a minute or two if you wanted to just address Andre's question too. Andre had a question too, and then.
Yeah, and I think Andre differentiating. I think what's really, and this is a great question in terms of the regulation of blockchain. There's specific technologies, and I think this gets to the core question that Ruben was addressing before, which is we're talking about a range of different technologies and applications, and actually they need to be dealt with very specifically. And right now, regulators are not uniformly prepared or even looking at these sets of technologies. And the first step really is to not just have a dialogue, but to have an education, if you will, broadly. Now, there are some folks who a couple years ago would have been characterized as not understanding, who have rapidly come up to speed on the technologies. And I think if you think about the regulators in the US at the SEC and both enforcement and the regulatory, you know, the rules making, they actually very sophisticated understanding. The engagement is whatever you think about rulings and that, the education, the rule makers and the regulators are quite sophisticated in certain areas and becoming more so across the board. But I do think it's obviously, we're talking about ways to get these, go from conversation to something which is informed rulemaking legislative process. I don't know if that answered it.
Mm-hmm. All right.
We're trying to create a structured way to have this dialogue.
Right.
So adding, yeah, that's essentially what we're trying to do. So yes.
All right. Since we're already over time, perhaps if you, I mean, here are your contact emails. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
We do, and we're inviting people. This is really a call to action. So reach out to us if you're interested. If you think we have to think about the design, rethink it, whatever it is, just reach out to us, and we'd love to engage.
All right. Wonderful, Michael, Ruben, Rianka, thank you so much for sharing with the group. And this is a super cool project. We're excited to have it in CodeX. And I hope that some of the folks in the group can help you push it forward. And it's a really important initiative, I think. And so thank you all for filling us in on this initiative. And yeah, let's close it here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the presenters, for the fantastic work you're doing and your great presentations. And thank you, the audience, for your great and thoughtful questions. And I'm already excited for our next meeting. I think every time there's really some interesting ideas coming out, and it's always a good conversation. So yeah, stay tuned for our next session, which will happen next Thursday at 1:30. And we'll send out an announcement early next week. And in the meantime, please, be safe and have a great rest of your week and weekend. And I'll catch you all next week.
Thanks, Roland.
Thanks
all.
All right. You all take care.
Roland.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.